So I will start and we'll see who logs in and who doesn't. I do have the Oxyde open here. I hope you guys have it as well because I know it'll sound as if I'm just saying that, but it is currently, of all the new releases, my favorite wine. And of course, partially it may have to do with the fact that it is summer and the wine is white. But even apart from that, the this type of Riesling that is just as dry as our Black Bow Riesling, but way friendlier early on in its life, um, works for us perfectly because, as I wrote in the newsletter, and I'm not just saying that, Riesling here at the farm is consumed far more than Chardonnay. Um, it's our palate, and of course, we love the Chardonnays as well, but there's something about the zestiness of the Riesling, and it just like the perkiness, regardless of which cuvee it is, as well as like the statuesque bodies of the black bows that it is just a clearer reflection of who we are in terms of what our taste in wine um, on a personal level um, is. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a little bit of information about Dioxide because it is the first time we release this cuvee, but at the same time, it's not the first time where we worked with that vineyard. So it comes from the Redfoot Vineyard. So that is about, if you guys know where Malaguar is or Redstone is, the vineyard is right across from Malaguar and right next to Redstone. So it's a vineyard of deep red clay soils. It's not ours. We initially started buying fruit from there in 2013. So in 2013, we bought some Gamay, which produced the first Cuvée Mon Unique, our Gamay. And in order for the farmer to sell us the Gamay, because a lot of deals happen like this around Niagara, we also had to take some white. So we did take some Riesling and some Chardonnay. So the 2013 Métier Blanc at the time was made with Chardonnay from the Redfoot Vineyard and some of our own. And the 2013 Riesling Redfoot was made exclusively with fruit from there. Same thing happened in 2014, Riesling, Chardonnay, and Gamay. And that is also when we bought some Viognier, which produced the one Viognier we've done so far, Cuvée Nadia. And then we lost that vineyard. We lost it as in, it's a big vineyard. It's a 60-acre vineyard. And because we're such small buyers, it was in the interest of the farmer to just give it to the bigger buyer that will take way more than we did and not be so, picky about the farming like we are. So 15, 16, 17, we didn't have access to that vineyard at all. But as of 2018, we worked out a long-term lease. So we do not own that vineyard, but we now farm it exclusively for ourselves, the whole thing. We keep very little for us. The rest we sell because, as I said, 60 acres is a lot of grapes and not all of them are of interest to us. So, but the Riesling and the Gamay, the Chardonnay, and the Cabernet Sauvignon is behind the Fury are all from that vineyard. So when you think about why we're so happy of having that vineyard, because Redfoot, in combination with the other two vineyards that we own, produces kind of like a trinity of what for us are the most interesting soils in Niagara. So 19th Street Vineyard, like the oldest vines, a bench vineyard, that on the bench, obviously, there is a lot of different factors, but you have clay loam soils sitting on a dolomitic limestone bed. Then the home farm vineyards here on the property, very heavy gravel, like uncompactable soils, high density vineyards, and the beautiful wines starting to come out of it now that the vines have some age on them. And to complete Redfoot Vineyard, and there are a lot of young vines, but there are a lot of also very old vines. But what is most interesting for us is the high level of red clay, iron in the soils. That's why the Gamay from there can be so good. Gamay and iron go like, it's one of those pairs made in heaven. There is a synergy between heavy presence of, like large presence of iron in the soils, and Gamay really likes that. And on top of that, that kind of red clay also, when expressed through the Riesling or the Chardonnay, produces wines that are like spicier in perfume, where the Black Bow Riesling would be more floral, more limpid, very crystalline. There's like spiciness and plushness here that to us are very, very alluring. So to that extent, actually, like a lot of people think that first and foremost, the name is Oxyde because we work in an oxidative way, and that's part of our reputation, that all of our wines are like oxidative, which is partially true in terms of our work, but it's not the reason for the name. The reason for the name is because, as far as we're concerned, the main component, the main reason for the singular character of this wine is the iron oxide in the soil. That's where the name comes from. And at this point, as I said, it used to be called just Cuvée Redfoot, but since we've started farming it, we're absolutely dedicated now to have like an Oxyde Riesling, hopefully every year for the next 8, because that's how long the lease is for. And it's kind of because the Chardonnays, the Cabernet Francs, all the wines from the top vineyard kind of have their little brothers and sisters, be it from home farm or from Redfoot. The Black Bow has been the one without a sibling. Of course, if you don't count the Sputniks that we did, but they every year the two times we did it, they were from 2 different vineyards. And as much as we like the wines, we weren't that happy with either one of them. But with the Oxyde, first year we produce it, and I know from like every single year it will be getting better, or it has all the reasons to get better, because our farming already, even in the span of a year and a half, you can see it's making huge difference in the health of the vineyard, in the biodiversity that is there. So that can only contribute to even more nuance and more flavors in the grapes. And we also, black label, white wine. I might have mentioned this before, but just to give you a little bit of an overview of how our portfolio now, 14 years in, is starting to get structured. Starting from the top, you have the most serious cuvées from 19th Street Vineyard. So Cuvée Madeleine in Cabernet Franc, Cuvée 19e in Chardonnay, Cuvée Black Bow in Riesling, and then as of this year, even the Pinot Noir will have a name, which is Chamboulay, but you're always looking at the original classic white label of Pearl Morissette with the different foils that they've had since the beginning, like different color foils. Then there is a line that is kind of shaping up now, which is like mid-tier. So those are no longer young vines, but certainly not wines that are yet ready to compete in terms of their structure, complexity, or longevity with the 19th Street cuvées. So Oxyde is the first one to be introduced in that line. Later this year, we're gonna have the second vintage of Fougue Chardonnay, which is gonna go to bottle in September, but it's also gonna be a black label. And the new Cabernet Franc that just got bottled from the home farm vineyard as well. Again, it's called the Racine du Ciel, but it just needs to chill out. We'll probably release it in the later fall. So in that mid-tier, you have black labels, black foils, and that's that. So these are wines that are certainly approachable when released, but definitely with way more substance and layers than the vin du soif or the entry-level wines that are for everyday drinking, which is the series where you have all the brightly colored labels, you know, the Fury, the Prim Souti. There is another one coming down the line, which has like a vibrant blue label. It's called Va Vient. But those wines, you know, $25 mark, pretty much are the synthesis. We're very happy to be finally able to make them, because before we just didn't have the fruit to do so. But we call them here our democratic wines. So 1000% Pearl Morris stamp in terms of their balance, you know, and what I constantly refer to as our Holy Trinity as texture, structure, and balance. That being said, the texture and structure are of a very forward, very engaging early on in the life of the wine type. So they normally get bottled in like after 8 months. You know, all of them been bottled in May, the year after harvest. While this Oxyde was also bottled in May, but it's from a year prior. So we're looking at 18 months. It's a 2018 vintage, not 2019. So the black labels, because wines with more structure also demand, if you are to respect and honor all the nuances that are in them, you have to give them time in aging in vessel or in bottle sometimes, but one way or another, they need more time. 8 months is not enough. If you want to represent the complexity and the nuance in the fruit, it doesn't happen overnight like everything in wine. You have to wait. It demands your patience. So we're looking there at anywhere between 18 to 24 months, just depending on the wine itself. And they're definitely mid-tier because there's quality to them that are relevant or can be related to the vin du soifs, just in terms of you can open them and you can drink them, and you don't necessarily have to decant them if you don't want to, but there's approachability to them, just like in the vin du soif, but they're not as how do I put it, they're not as I don't want to say simple because it's got somewhat of a negative implication. They're not as easy flowing. They flow beautifully, but if you want to go cerebral with them, you can go cerebral with them. There are also wines that, as wonderful as the Oxyde is now, I know it will continue developing and developing and developing. Would it develop as much as the Black Bow? Absolutely not. But as years pass, and you know, we're bringing more and more biodiversity and health to the Redfoot Vineyard, I'm positive, because some of the vines in the Redfoot Vineyard are older than our old vines. They're like a lot, like Chardonnay is way older than our old vines. But farming makes a huge, huge, huge difference in terms of how much flavor your vines can give you. And this is something that I realized in 2014, because if you're to go on the normal premise of old vines, serious wines, that's only valid if the vines are farmed well. Because you can have old vines and you can have the vineyard soils completely dead, which would mean that the vines are tired, both from the age and from the fact that there's no biodiversity in the soil. And if on top of that, you are not adjusting your crop for the energy that the that the vine has, you can allow those old vines to produce a lot of fruit. And the combination of all these factors, even though you look at the vines, you're like, oh, you're a serious vine, can actually give you wines that are certainly not a reflection of the age and what is possible in those vines. As an example, the 2014 Métis Blanc Chardonnay is 100% from Redfoot Vineyard. And those are, I would say, in the 35-year-old age type of paradigm, those vines. 19th Street in 2014 would be half that age. But there's absolutely no comparison between the seriousness of the vines. The Métis Blanc, was our entry level kind of like, here you go, like drink it by the case type of wine, while the 2014 19 obviously took a lot more aging and is a far, far better wine. So that is all to say that we're really working hard on getting this vineyard to an optimal health. And it's very encouraging to see that just 2 years, not even 2 years, a year and a half of farming, how big of a difference it's already making. And Oxyde was done in our first year of the lease. The next vintage is obviously like still in Foudre and won't be bottled until next May, but it's very promising as well. So this wine was actually just one big Alsatian Foudre, hence the 297 cases. I think that would make it around a 700-800 liter old Alsatian Foudre. There were no problems with it whatsoever. Generally, actually, knock on wood, that's the case with Rieslings. Riesling very rarely gives you a challenge in terms of fermentation or any bacterial issues that you may have during élevage with the other wines. That's both because Riesling has the lowest pH level of all the grapes that we work with and the highest acidity. So in and of itself, that is a way healthier environment, or like not way healthier, but a way easier environment for the good yeasts to do their job, while the bad yeasts or any bacteria to procreate, because obviously they don't really like either low pH or high acid environments. And we did not do anything to that wine. It fermented in the Foudre. It was never racked until bottling, stayed like on its primary lease without any movement, like any batonnage or moving of a container, pretty much since October 2018 until April 2020. And then we just stainless steel, which is obvious, like that's the last step before we go into bottle. We move the wines to stainless steel tank, where with the lower temperature that we can adjust, they precipitate sediment to the bottom and can be bottled without finding infiltration while being completely clear. I did not know whether we'll be able to release it in in the summer, which it is very useful considering it's our only white wine apart from the Black Bow and the top Chardonnay, the 19, because Rieslings generally do something after bottling that's both scary and infuriating, which is they shut down extremely tight. We are not as scared anymore of this pattern because we see it having repeated itself with every single cuvée. But what happens is, every wine goes through bottle shock, but generally what bottle shock would entail is having the wines not really show themselves too well, not showing their fruit, just being very quiet and sort of asleep. Riesling goes a few steps further and either becomes very, very, very reductive, i.e. very sulfuric on the nose, but stinky, not just, ooh, it's a little bit of smokiness here. No, like when Riesling gets reductive, it is, you can smell it 10 meters away, or does the exact opposite thing, which is become extremely oxidative. And in the first couple of years of bottling Black Bull, honestly, like we were scared both times before we realized it's a pattern that we've screwed up something during the bottling and we've lost the wine. It's so oxidative that it's hard to differentiate it from a Manzanilla sherry or any, or like a Jura, like, or Vengeance, anything with a deeply oxidative character. All the fruit disappears and all you can smell is what in technical terms it's like the aldehydic notes, and the aldehydic notes are the oxidative notes. So knowing that, we were kind of, well, let's see if the Oxyde does it. It did not. I've been having probably a bottle every second or third day since the bottling. Have encountered one that was somewhat reductive and stinky, but nothing in comparison to what we've learned to expect from the Black Bull. So, as I said, as much as that doesn't scare us anymore, at the same time, it's not optimal, because then you just need to wait even further for the wine to recompose itself before you're able even to consider putting it on the market, because you obviously cannot expect from everybody to understand that's a pattern in Riesling. And so far so good. Hopefully I don't jinx it and then it goes into a shutdown mode like later in the year, but it's not showing any signs of doing that. And then on top of it, that is the first Riesling we bottled in a Burgundy bottle. As I said in the newsletter and then in the little trivia question we sent out, it's from a very, very pragmatic reason. No, and I was the one that was actually against it at first, but I was against it for purely romantic reasons, because I love Riesling so much and I love the elongated bottle and the association that I have of the bottle shape with, the shape of Riesling in Niagara, that statuesque, as I referred to it before, body, very long, lean, and supple. That's all fine and dandy, but when you bottle like that, first and foremost, a completely different bottle that you have to get from a completely different supplier. You need a completely different packaging. It prevents us from packing bottles most efficiently when we do mixed cases, because it is the only bottle that's a different shape. Everything else, it's a burgundy shape, apart from the few bottles that are, L'Oubliette de Bordeaux, but they're few and far in between, and they do fit in the burgundy cases. You have to have different size cages, so that's how we store the wines, laying on their side in cages. And Riesling bottles require a completely different setup. And on top of that, they're generally a little bit heavier, which is very important, than Burgundy bottles. So in the past 3 or 4 years, we've been making strides, examining all aspects of our operation, because I don't mean to brag at all, but since day one, this has been always we always think about no waste, least amount of footprint possible, both in the vineyard, on the wines, and of course, on the environment, like all of our activities. We dispose of water a certain way, everything. So we are finally able to tackle the packaging situation. And the lightest bottle we can find is the one that now all the wines are in. Because before, our top guys were in a little bit of a heavier bottle, but now every single wine from this bottling onwards is in the exact same bottle, and it's 395 grams. So simplify the packaging. We export a lot, so obviously the weight of the pallets is greatly improved by having one type of bottle and a light one at that end travel across. And my romantic idea about the Riesling bottles in the flute, Riesling in the flute bottles uh, will continue to live only through the back vintages. I let go of it fully. I think that we'll probably have one or two more black bows bottled in a Riesling bottle, just because we have leftover bottles of the flute ones, and it's going to be obviously completely irresponsible of us not to use them. But you can now, whether it's Riesling, Chardonnay, whatever, orange wine, not orange wine, every single type of wine we do is going to be in that bottle. So apart from that, so it's new on many levels, and it's a new beginning on many different in many different senses, but very excited about it. And another aspect of it that I'm just now, like, I know that I'm going to start hearing from our restaurant customers shortly, now that I start working with the wine. There are people that love Riesling, and I'm happy we have many of those people as customers, but there's certainly a generally strong resistance towards Riesling among the general public, because obviously it's associated with sweetness, or it's associated with like very hard acidity, and it hasn't been spoken of in the same other, admirable terms as Chardonnay or Pinot have been. I don't know why. I mean, I know why. There's, a Riesling from a century ago, like German Riesling a century ago was considered one of the best wines of the world, and definitely not only on par, but probably even in front of Burgundian Chardonnay. But between, the outcomes of the Second World War and not being able to produce anything close to the Rieslings of old, but working with a lot of diluted fruit. And then there was a huge scandal, just off the top of my head, so I may be wrong about the year, but I think it was in the 1980s, where in Germany and Austria, people were caught with putting like antifreeze in bottles, diluting Riesling with antifreeze. And obviously that got discovered and really, really, really destroyed the reputation of German and Austrian wine, and Riesling, obviously, as the main grape variety that they work with. If you ask most Psalms, Riesling is that kind of grape that most Psalms always tell, like it's a favorite of Psalms, like, but it doesn't sell a lot. Why that is, I really feel it's just not enough education, and most people associating it with sweetness. Now, with us here, the Black Bow is as popular as the Chardonnay. I'm sure the Oxyde hopefully will earn its own spot through the years as a wine that has got a unique character and a very, I believe, like a very satisfying, very delicious one. What I love about it the most is the softness. It's got beautiful Riesling qualities in terms of, as I mentioned before, the zestiness of the acid, that crystalline fruit, like nuance, but there is softness to it and a beautiful flow. That's why when I was writing the tasting notes, I said it's like it's a sunlight caught in a teardrop, meaning there's roundness, but there's a lot of crystallinity and a lot of I call it like wines of fluid release. It just uh, flows down the palate without losing its Rieslingness, without losing that puckery feeling that the Riesling has. And I'm very interested to see how this wine develops. I already said we constantly crack a bottle and taste it, and we constantly have the intention to leave it open for a week or so just to educate ourselves where it's going. And we haven't been so successful well, we haven't been successful at all in doing that, because we just finished the bottle, if not the day after. But the good thing is, again, that it doesn't seem to want to close down, and it's like its dryness, because just like all the other Rieslings we produce, it's 100% dry, 0 grams of residual sugar. Um, its dryness is not as um, tightly woven as in the black bow, because the black bow, when it's young, the acidity and the absence of sugar can make it be not undrinkable, but certainly not a wine of relaxation. I'm sure, like I've said this before, I used to joke about the 2013 Black Bow, that when it was young, it was a wine that's halfway between a slap and electrocution. They're extremely focused wines with like tension that just shakes you up, and they need a lot of bottle aging. Hence, neither the 12 Black Bow or the 15 Black Bow, which are the most complex black bows that we've done with the strongest of bones, neither one of them is released. With the Oxyde, we have a different situation, a different bearing coming from the wine, and it works, as I said, like that makes us happy because we are big Riesling consumers here. Have most of you have a chance to taste it yet?
Having a glass with you right now.
Okay, wonderful. And any likes, dislikes, or feedbacks? I'm very curious to hear.
Love the color. It's got a really smooth start to it. And then really nice effervescence kind of in the middle.
Okay, so this is a very good point, Matt, because I actually got a message from somebody today um, saying, no, they had the Fury, I believe, or maybe it was even the Oxide, and said like there's a little bit of effervescence. Is that unfinished fermentation? Which no, it is not. We would never put something out that hasn't finished fermenting just because, yeah, nobody wants secondary fermentation in bottle or the bottle exploding. Um, wine, because these are extremely low sulfur wines. I have to look at the Riesling sulfur addition because I'm forgetting it now. I'm blanking on it, but it's definitely under 10. Very, very small. So when you're working with these wines during bottling, what you're doing is actually using more CO2 when pumping the wines into the bottling machine, because it's a very disruptive, it is the most disruptive part of wine's lives, um, bottling itself. And when sulfur is as low as in all of our wines, you want to give it some extra protection, which CO2 acts as. So for the first few months after bottling, you can get a little bit of that effervescence on the palate, which is pretty much a residual CO2 from bottling. It has nothing to do with the wine's structure itself. And how you know that is this versus any re-fermentation in bottle is that when you pour it in the glass and if you swirl it around a few times, it's gone. It disappears. And even if you don't open the bottle, as the wine continues to age, that residual CO2 will get dissolved in the wine. Because our wines generally have, and please let me know if I'm getting too nerdy. Our wines have a lot of residual CO2 in them for a couple of reasons. First, because they sit on primary lees undisturbed for as long as they do. So as fermentation completes, and one of the byproduct of fermentation, apart from sugar turning into alcohol, fermentation produces heat and CO2. So as fermentation completes, this CO2, the one that hasn't escaped through the fermentation bung, because once the wine is dry, we hard cap it, meaning there is no opening. That CO2 sits in the wine, allowing, protecting it, just as during bottling, that protects it. Then, first and foremost, we don't really do batonnage, which is stirring. Normally, that is done to bulk up the wines. We feel that in Niagara, we already have enough plushness to the fruit, even in cooler vintages, that we don't need any bulking up of the fruit. So imagine if you're doing batonnage during aging, every time you do batonnage, you have to remove the hard cap, introduce oxygen, allow CO2 to escape, and you're continuously losing that CO2 that's in the wine. We don't do that. Once the wine is there and it's dry, the only time we will remove the hard cap is to top up the wine, right? Because during aging, you have small evaporation happening through the staves of the barrel or the foudre, and you have to keep the wine topped up so it doesn't develop a film at the top and doesn't start oxidizing while in barrel. The other aspect of it is the lees themselves. So lees are the dead yeast cells that precipitate to the bottom, plus a lot of small skin debris, because we like to ferment the wines quite turbid. A lot of people, what they will do is first, before allowing fermentation to proceed, they'll put the wines in tank. It's as if it's in the fridge. They would allow the heavy lees, the sediment, even in the juice, to fall down to the bottom. And from then on, it's called a decantation or sedimenting. From then on, they'll take that clear juice and put it in the whatever fermenting vessel they've chosen and ferment clear. Because fermenting clear, it's a much faster fermentation. It's much safer. That being said, it won't ever allow you to develop the textures and the flavors that fermenting at high turbidity would. So our fermentations are always much slower. They don't really go up to high temperatures, which we like. We don't control the temperature in the wines during fermentation because we don't want to ferment cold. But even the type of the juice that's fermenting is keeping the temperature relatively steady. So at the end of fermentation, you have a lot of these small skin debris that the gas of fermentation has kept in suspension in the wines, slowly precipitate to the bottom and start feeding with start mixing with the dead yeast cells for a process that's called autolysis. So even this process in itself produces small amounts of CO2 that gets really released back into the wine. And again, if you're like most other wineries, you'll be racking the wine at least 2 or 3 times. And when you rack the wine to get rid of the lees, you're obviously also allowing the CO2 to evaporate or go away. We don't do that. So between the residual CO2 from fermentation and the micro infusions of CO2 that are coming from the lees, our wines naturally have a lot of dissolved CO2 in them, which acts as a protectant of the wine itself during élevage and allows us to sleep sounder without adding any sulfur until the very, very, very end. And that plus, again, the reason for CO2 during bottling will, in 99.9% of our wines, present itself as a perceived effervescence soon after bottling is very common, which, certain wines, like, it doesn't interfere with any of the wines, but it can brighten up the character of certain wines, like Riesling, for example, or it may taste a little bit weird if it's in Cabernet Sauvignon. But whenever I get these questions, I always say, if you don't like it, just swirl the bottle, or what a lot of people will do, not swirl the bottle, swirl the wine in the glass, or shake the bottle and remove the cork, and you'll see the amount of CO2 that it escapes. It pops. It pops like a sparkling, because there's a lot of it inside the wine itself. And then you won't have any of that on the palate. Was that too nerdy? Sorry, I just went off on CO2 big time.
Oh.
Well, thank you. So let me know, because I'm really curious to hear. I see, thank you, like both Andrew and Pierre and Corey. Corey saying haven't uncorked it yet, but everybody else finds it delicious, which I'm very happy with. But I'm curious to know, is it surprising to you? And does it have, is it strange? Or is the only strangeness about it the fact that it is a Riesling? I just really want to kind of get a sense of, because we even remove, it's not only on this one, it's on everyone. We removed the grape varieties from the top front label. It's only at the back. That's not to hide them at all. That's not at all our intention. But when we actually feel that there's a strong identity to the wine, where we can start discussing the vineyard itself, or the combination of that grape variety and that vineyard, this is when we when we actually give it a name, and kind of remove the grape variety to the back in a symbolic gesture of the grape variety is what's produced this wine, but alongside the climate during that year and the vineyard itself. It's one of the factors. It's not defining factor for the character. So, like, I was, just emailing our restaurant partners and wanting to hear how people are perceiving the wine yet, or is it easier for them to sell it because it's in Burgundy bottle and it doesn't say Riesling on it. Haven't heard back from many. The ones that I heard back are like, is Burdock, and Burdock's like, nobody cares what the grape is. It says Pro Morris said it's a new cuvée. People seem to like it. But I wanted to hear more of the, just direct feedback from the people that drink it. Great Riesling taste reminiscent of the Alsace, reflecting of Ontario terroir, says Pierre. Thank you. That's very kind then. think really on point, because what I normally think is, in a blind tasting of Niagara, Alsace, Austria, and Germany, and I've led a couple of those at the Sommelier Factory and in a couple of other places. It's there is absolutely no like it's obvious that Niagara Riesling, in terms of its outward shape, it's way closer to both Alsace and Austria than it is to Germany. Why we decided that the model here should be Germany is beyond, it's not actually beyond me. It's for a very like situational, whatever, pragmatic reason that has nothing to do with the Niagara terroir and everything to do with the fact that Karl Kaiser, who was an Austrian guy that brought the first Riesling vines here, loved German Riesling, and that started being established at as the model, like as the aspiration to what Niagara can produce. Because at the time we're talking, don't quote me on that because I will probably like completely screw up the years, but probably in the 70s, it's when Niagara first started concentrating on Riesling. And then, of course, Cave Springs, 1981, 1982, they really elevated the Riesling to a high point. But it's always been in the Moselle model, Germany, Moselle, Germany, Moselle. That is it, that is that. And to me, it's just another example of how we can, like, we are trying to define the expression of Niagara terroir solely based on the preferences of the people that started establishing it. But if you are to allow Riesling to do what it wants to do here, which is what Pearl Morissette does, just because we work like that with every single grape variety, the grape variety will show you what it wants to be. So in order to produce German type Rieslings here, you have to intervene during fermentation and block it. You have to sulfur heavily. And then you have to filter really, really, really well. Because obviously, if you're leaving sugar in the wine, and if you're left with any like one or two yeast cells that are not filtered out, then you're gonna have a big problem when everything starts fermenting in bottle after the bottle's been corked. So all of those steps are human interventions along the path of the wine in order to push it to go a certain way. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It just happens to be the exact opposite way of working than we do. Because for us, like stopping fermentation in the middle, sulfuring in the like before the wine has even started aging in vessel, and then filtering, very like fine filtering, like we just don't do any of those things. We don't, like, we believe that you can get to where the wine wants to get by following its natural processes. And in Riesling's case, the natural process ends up being 100% dry, 0 grams of sugar, and the wine always goes through spontaneous malolactic fermentation, regardless of vintages, regardless of fermentation vessels, regardless of vineyard sources. And those things are processes that you encounter in Alsace and in Austria, but very rarely in Germany. Even though now German Rieslings are getting drier and drier and drier because they're getting riper and riper and riper because of global warming and climate change. So you'll see it's already there, but in the next 5 or 6 years, I think it'll be very obvious for everyone how much drier older German Rieslings have become, just because when you have riper fruit and you have a higher pH level, the Riesling will ferment all of its sugar, as opposed to stopping halfway, which happens in Germany. Because in Germany, when you have Rieslings with residual sugar in it, most of the time that is not through intervention, like here in Niagara, but because the acidity is very high, much higher than Niagara, and the pHs are very low, much lower than Niagara. So you can have sugar in the bottle and yeast in the bottle and be completely secure that it won't ferment, just because the environment's completely inhospitable to yeast. And if you didn't have sugar in those cases, it's like I normally say, German Rieslings, it will be like drinking battery acid. So it's, the wine knows where its balance is and shows you that through the processes it undergoes, as long as you allow it to undergo them. And like, you know, when Francois first came here, he didn't come with the idea of like, let's make like dry Riesling that goes through malolactic. No, it's like, let's check out what Riesling does. And the from then on, you know, once you understand what is the natural aptitude for Riesling in Niagara, then, you know, we went from small barrels to big foudre, and now it's a combination of foudre and concrete. Then you just fine tune, fine tune, fine tune. But the one thing that doesn't change is that the wine always, like Riesling always does what it did the first year. We allowed it to ferment and treated it the same way as we treat any other grape variety. Andrew says it was very food friendly, perfect for the summer heat we've had. Yes. Not as complex as the Black Bowl or in your face, but more approachable. Yes. We have a few bottles. We need to try it a few more times. Hopefully, yes, please do. And yeah, like that's exactly my take on it. What I'm really curious about is how, because as you taste it now, you see it's got the fruit, it's got that lushness and plushness, but at the back of it, it's got tannin. They're like wrapped up in fruit, so they're not, as I was saying before, they're not as tightly grained and attacking as they would be in a young Black Bowl, but they're there. So when you taste that, that is just another sign of how much more the wine will be able to give, because that dryness, that tightness at the back, that is exactly that those are exactly the molecules that, as the wine continues to age in bottle, will continue polymerizing and building longer chains and allowing more fruit to release into the wine, both in terms of flavor and in terms of perfume. And that's pretty much, you can take this to the bank for any wine. As soft and as like any white wine, obviously red as well, but different. As soft and as appealing as a wine is, if you have that little bit of like astringency that comes, in our case, it comes from tannin, because we press for a lot, we extract tannin from the skin, because as you all know now very well, we love structure and texture. Those are the beginnings of the future structure and texture of the wine, that by the time it fully develops, you won't be able to taste that little dryness at the back, because the chains will be much longer and the wines would have unfolded into like something richer than what it is now. But at the same time, you know, that is exactly what the black label is. This is all fine and dandy and something to look forward to, but the wines are as pleasurable like to drink now. Like just for a comparison's sake, the 2018 Black Bowl is still in vessel and no plans to bottle it for a long time. And even in vessel, when you like, you know, obviously like we go and taste it, it is yeah, it's electric shock because the 2018s also have a lot of bones to them, bones, high acid. It's like there's gonna be a lot of there needs to for a lot of time needs to pass before the 2018 Black Ball is at the point where it gives you pleasure. While the Oxyde, yes, it will develop. Yes, it'll get better. But yes, you know, I'm halfway down the bottle already. Okay. Any other questions?
A quick question in comparing the Black Ball and the Oxyde. What is it you think made the Black Ball what it is versus what we're tasting in the Oxyde? Was it the fruit? Was it the process? Was it something else?
Oof, it's a very good question. And I think it's a combination of a few different things. So the Black Bull, the 19th Street Vineyard, that's our original vineyard. So that's the vineyard that Mel Pearl purchased before even meeting Francois. And it's a vineyard that's already, like, it was planted between 1999 and 2001. When Mel bought it, it was in a very rough, like beaten up shape. He only got it because it actually is located right across from where Boisset and Constellation at the time, which owned, I'm sure all of you are familiar with Le Clos Jourdain, or what Le Clos Jourdain used to be. So it was a collaboration between Boisset, a huge French conglomerate, and Constellation being the huge Canadian conglomerate. So they were going to build a winery for Le Clos Jourdain, like a showpiece winery on 19th Street, where this vineyard is. And it was to be designed by Frank Gehry. So Mel Pearl is a real estate developer in Toronto. And of course, like he bought it as a real estate development, because of course, like land right across from a Frank Gehry building would definitely appreciate. But then, you know, one thing led to another. He decided he wants to farm grapes, then met Francois. And the vineyard was in a very beaten up shape, but it's also in a beautiful, beautiful spot. And the vines, at that point, they were like 10 years old, almost, but had a lot of issues. Now, what is good about having control of your own farming and what Niagara can give you, because Niagara is very rich in biodiversity. So when you start farming properly, a vineyard can shift like to a healthy state far faster than that is possible in, let's say, in a beaten up vineyard in France or Italy, so like in somewhere in the old world, just because the biodiversity of the soils, the biodiversity of the surrounding environment, as well as the fact that generally speaking, there is a lot of topsoil here, which is a good thing, all contribute to allowing the grapevines to go back to a healthier state. You know, what organic and biodynamic farming accomplish in, let's say, in a beaten up vineyard in France for 10 years, here you can do in 3. So that's a huge plus. So first and foremost, then 19th Street Vineyard is the vineyard that we farmed the longest. You know, original vineyard, we started farming it in 2007. So it is very like safe to say that from all the vineyards is in the best state possible, just because it's seen the most care. Now the home farm is also good because there was not a vineyard here before we planted it, but that one's got different challenges because the plants are so close together, so it's a different thing here. Then the vines there, as I said, it's not that they're too old, but even before taking the vineyard, there's certain viruses in them, like crown gall, or it's called like red blotch. So those are not things that kill vines, but they're also not things that you can annihilate. Like you cannot remove them. All you're working for is hopefully allowing for the vine to live as much or as long as possible, and then slowly replanting the vineyard with new plant material. So why I'm talking about viruses, well, especially in the current climate, but in a positive way, it's because what that does to vines, and there have been a lot of studies there, a lot of the other vines in the world are diseased by those vines, by those viruses that don't kill it. They act as an extra challenge, as an extra, they extra pressure to the vine. So when the vine is struggling, because it's got that virus to ripen, like a struggle to ripen, be it because of density, because of virus, because of poor soils, poor as in not bad, just poor, not a lot of topsoil material, will always give you better fruit. Or, when somebody's struggling the most, it's like it gives you their best effort. Now, if it's struggling too much, that's not good, but it provides constructive stimulus to the vine to give you fruit that is way more complex than the age of the vines will suggest. So, and then of course, I can make the generally safe argument that the bench, like vineyards that are actually, that's considered 20-mile bench, but that any bench vineyard is better suited for Riesling than like Riesling that's planted on the lakeshore lands, be it in Niagara or even here in the lowlands. But it's a combination of a lot of factors that give the black bowl the kind of that make the black bowl a synthesis of like tightness, complexity, long life, both because of its acidity, because of the location, and acidity because of the grape, and allow it. As far as I'm concerned, I'm sure some of you have already heard me say that before. If Pearl Morissette is known 100 years from now in some sort of imaginary future, I have no doubt that as great as all the wines are, it would be the Rieslings that are most appreciated, because it's the establishment of something idiosyncratic, but not because of us trying to be original, but because it is the language of Niagara. And the singularity of that language, I believe it's much better expressed in Riesling than in anything else. It produces outstanding Chardonnays. It produces outstanding Cabernet Franc, Gamay as well. But in all of those other grape varieties, the Niagara is always there, but there are more obvious parallels with existing references. And depending on the vintage, it may be Bordeaux for Cabernet Franc, or it may be Loire. In Chardonnay, maybe not California, but kind of like a weird California, because it's rich but not heavy. Or in cool vintages, yeah, it can resemble Burgundy, but a lush Burgundy. For Riesling, you can make the association, and as I do, and Pierre pointed out, like in Alsace and sometimes Austria as well, but the wines more more distinct than any of the references that exist for that grape variety. So in the Black Bow, you can see that very like straight away if you get over how tight it is in the beginning. In the Oxyde, you see that too, but from a different perspective. Because if we are to talk about the soils in Redfoot, that, you know, I already said that the spiciness and that softness that uh, comes from the red clay. You know, Riesling on red clay is not something that you hear of too often. You know, there's Riesling on red schist. There's Riesling, like I forget, like there's a very Austrian word, schist. Sorry, I'm blanking on it, but it's not common to hear about Riesling on red clay, is what I'm trying to say. Clay is an amazing type of soil because it can hold water very well. So like right now, like we're going through a very, very dry year. We are very little concerned about Redfoot because there is a lot of clay there. And on top of that, what I found, not only in our wines, but in other wines from Niagara on the river, let's say, more so than Niagara on the lake, because Niagara River is more clay. Niagara on the lake's got a lot more sand. Um, Clay has this like beautiful, like it pushes aromatics forward early on, just as Dioxide makes the example of. Early on in life, more aromatics, more suppleness, more spiciness. Certainly not the taut body of a black ball, but a completely different type of charm and allure to it. To me, this actually reminds me, or can remind me a lot um, of like Chenin Blanc in, like, you know, just kind of warm vintage Chenin Blancs can have that honeyed, spicy quality with this amount of like very puckering acid. So they're both these wines, Black Bow and Oxide, are so Niagara, but so completely different from each other. And to us, that's one of the most fascinating things to see and explore, because just as you're discovering these wines, we're discovering their characters while making them. And, you know, it's going to be, we can compare the Oxide to the fruit to the wines that we made from that vineyard before, but it's not really the same because we didn't farm that fruit at all. We had no say on the yields or anything like that. While here, like it is fully farmed Pearl Morissette fruits from this place. So we are discovering the character of the vineyard through the different grapes that we're working with. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Perfectly. You nailed it.
Thank you. Thank you. And Corey's asking, what's your best guess when Oxide, as enjoyable as it is might be now, will hit its peak? Oof. I would say, so the last time I had I'm just going to contradict myself right now because I will make a parallel with the Redfoot when I said it probably is not valid. But last year, I had the 2014 Redfoot in a restaurant. And so it would have been 19. So 5 years on, it felt like it's in fully open stage and it doesn't go much more places. No, it doesn't have much more places to go to. Now, what we have in the Oxide, it's definitely a way more serious wine than the 2014 Redfoot. So I would assume 5 to 7 year mark, conservatively speaking. But I don't know. I really don't know. What we need to do is I'm gonna keep you posted because I'm gonna make sure the way we try and see into the future is by leaving a bottle open at a cellar temperature, but like at least halfway empty, um, for a week, hopefully two, and continuously going to check it on a daily basis. Because as the bottle ingests more and more and more oxygen, from one day to another, it's showing you different aspects to it. But what you're technically doing is speeded aging. Just like in beer, when the guys like they warm up the wort, what they're also doing is speeded aging in order to see where the borders of their material, like, yeah, their material's longevity is. Here, through oxygenation, um, and checking on it, we can kind of, if a wine, which happens very often, the 19th Street wines are very good at that. You give it more oxygen and it gets more reductive. Now, if you say that to anybody that's gone through what do you call, like, just like normal scientific winemaking training, like we've had people in the cellar here with masters at such and such university, that is like, it cannot be. There is no way that you give something more oxygen, but the wine gets more reductive. It's against everything that's been written in the literature. But they've been here, they've seen it with their own eyes, and they'll be the first ones to say, oh, if I didn't see that and taste that, I would never believe it. But what the wine is telling you, when it gets reductive or it gets tight, you're pretty much putting it in a position to open itself, but the wine is getting tighter. It's telling you that it's way more serious than you think. That happened with the 2017 Irreverence, if any of you have had it. Francois and I both felt it's like, oh, it's simple, beautiful, tra-la-la kind of wine. And it proved us so wrong, because the more it sat in bottle, the more edgy it became, like elbows out, stinky. And it's only now 2020, so 3 years down the road, where it's now digested itself and it's just exploding out of the glass. So we had it absolutely wrong. In our defense, it was the first time we did a wine like that, so we weren't able to read through it very well. But what we learned along the way, it's this part of the behavior of the wine. If you're trying to open the wine by giving it oxygen and it's getting quieter or getting stinkier, it's saying, I'm going to be going into a closure phase soon because I have a lot more structure than you think I do, and I'm going to be coming out of it at some point later. And if you continue with, we call this oxygen trial, if we continue holding that bottle, then it turns a corner afterwards, and then the reduction is gone, the stinkiness is gone, and then you see the other underlayer of the wine. So this is generally how we work in trying to understand the future behavior of the bottles. And most of the time, it's a pretty reliable way to foresee it. And as I mentioned before, we haven't done with the Oxyde yet, just because we finished the bottles. But I'm gonna make it a point to start an oxygen trial this week and see what the Oxyde tells us. I would say 5 to 7 years of life is very conservative. Just because I also know when we did oxygen trials before bottling, just to see how much sulfur to put in, this wine was so stable. It just sat on the trial bench and did not move at all for weeks. That, as I said, it's less than 10 ppm of sulfur we've put in. And it just showed us that it's always been, since day one, it's been one of those wines that we didn't even think about it that much. because no matter when we went to check it in the foudre or when we went to check it like in the stainless steel tank before opening, it never showed any attitude problems. It was always on point. And maybe that's why we haven't even done an oxygen trial yet, because it hasn't presented us with any like tough questions, and it's just too delicious to drink. But in the name of being thorough, I will definitely like get one going tomorrow. But I hope you guys enjoy it. I mean, I do. And I hope everybody enjoys it, because I think it's just a very particular type of beauty and deliciousness. And as I mentioned, for me, it's very interesting because I've been so obsessed with the black bowl over the years to discover a different expression of the same type of identity, the Niagara identity of Riesling. It's exciting. It's just really exciting. Plus, I don't have to wait for it as long as we do for the other ones. But you heard it here first. Maybe we're gonna release the 15 or the 12 Black Bowl this year, just because both been aging for a long time. And on Friday we open a bottle of the 15, and it seems like ready to go. But yeah, those two, the 2012 and the 2015, they've been a long time coming. So I've been really looking forward to just putting some out and getting people to know, because this is what it's great, or we think it's great we are able to do now that we have the Vin du Soif wines, the Principes, the Furies, and even a little bit more volume of these black labels. What that allows us to do is age our top wines for as long as they want. If the 12 Black Bowl says like I'm not ready, let it be in like 2 more years, we'll do that. The 2015 Madeleine just got bottled, that's in May, so that's like 5 years in vessel before going into bottle, and probably gonna see another year and a half. So when we have the seriousness and the complexity, which is our true, all of these wines are carriers of our true identity, but what we really love, because we love drinking old wines, and in turn we love making wines that have the capacity to age. And we're lucky enough to have the 19th Street Vineyard fruit that gives us serious material, which allows us to make these like complex, nuanced, long-lived wines. So as wonderful as it is to release a Madeleine or a Black Bowl early on and tell people it's a great wine, but if you really want to figure out how great it is, don't touch it now. I think there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people over the world do it, but if we can afford, that's why we don't have fancy tasting bars and there's no asphalt on the driveway. Like, we like to concentrate any energy and money that we have in actually building out a program where through our patients and through obviously the financial support needs to be concentrated towards wines, and currently that means not releasing the serious wines for as long as we can, because it makes a huge difference the amount of time they stay in bottle. They stay in vessel. I don't know if any of you have tasted the 2013 L'Oublié, the forgotten one, which was the 2013 Madeleine, but just one barrel of it that, rather than being bottled in 2 years, was bottled in 6. I currently had a couple of people write to me about it and said that it blew their mind. It is which I completely agree. It's a wine that blind, even when you have high expectation and opinion of Niagara Cabernet Franc. I greatly, greatly, greatly doubt that anybody blind would call it a Niagara Cabernet Franc, because the class that it exudes, you know, the layers and layers and layers of like flavor and the myriad of textures, it's something like on a completely different level. And it is the absolute same juice that is in the 2013 Madeleine, but it had more time, 4 more years in vessel, to allow all these things to build out. So we want to be able to do, when the wine has the DNA to take long aging, we want to be able to allow it to take as much aging as it needs. So um, be it the Cabernet Franc, the Black Boss, whatever it is, you know, the serious, serious wines. And that is, you know, on one side, we can have the democratic wines. That is like, you know, people Tuesday night drinking, Wednesday night drinking. That's still, we're as proud of them as we are of the top shelf guns, but they have a completely different character. So there's, you know, lovely everyday drinking wines on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other side, bottles that hopefully will stop everybody in their tracks and make them even prouder of what is being produced in Niagara. But you cannot force those things, right? It doesn't matter how much new oak you throw on them or how many different tricks you do. At the end of the day, the recipe is simple: great farming, healthy fermentation, patience in aging, and don't screw it up. Niagara's got it. If you don't screw it up, Niagara can give you a Cabernet Sauvignon like Fury that's, you know, what do you call it, like an explosive everyday drinker. And on the other side, Riesling like the Black Bowl that can age for decades. Andrew's saying, I have one bottle, I'm assuming this is for the Loublier, was told not to drink it anytime soon. Who told you that? Was it me? No, probably not. You can drink it, but you can also age it. Like 2013, like any of the Top Guns, when they are released, we think they can be drunk, but that is not at all us meaning that drink it now. Every single one of them has got at least, I'm just like going through the Rolodex in my head of all the Top Guns, like at time of release, all of them have at least 10 years in front of them, at least, at the very, very least. And that's not to say 2013, you know, Loublier, it's 2023. I mean, 2013 Loublier was released last year in 2019. That's 10 years from then. And you're not gonna be wrong to drink it at any point during that time. It's, I haven't had it, well, because it was only 60 cases or something like that. So even here we have 24 bottles. So it's not often that we open it, but it's always special. Wines that have been, at least for us, like we like wines with age. So it just gives them a different balance, a different flow. So, but if you're gonna be drinking it anytime soon, Andrew, make sure that, like, you know, you have a special moment, or, you know, you can sit with it for a couple of hours. Okay. Look at that, like 7:23, and I only had one wine to talk about. Do you guys have any more questions? You know what, it's been so funny because Corey actually made a good point for me during email, and I'm sorry, both you, Andrew, Matt, and Corey, I owe 3 of you emails, and I will get to it, I promise. But Corey, your last point about it's good to like take a break. It was good to take a break even on this side, because obviously it also got very, very busy in the vineyards. And at first I thought, oh, July is going to be very busy. We're going to do like different videos and so on and so forth. But, you know, reality is very different than the plans that we have. But we are trying to figure out, I mean, not trying to figure out. We're pretty much, I think the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to have Francois on and I'm going to interview him and then he's going to interview me. Just like fun, different formats. So you don't just listen to me talk about the wines. But if you have any ideas, just shoot them my way. And it doesn't need to be like a live session because we'll probably do like the interviews. We're gonna have somebody record them. But any ideas about what you'd like to see, let me know because it'll really help us out because we're really bad with this kind of thing. We just know how to talk about the wines, but we really don't know exactly what's interesting to people. And even when I've watched other people do it, I wasn't complaining, but I'm like, guys, I was talking to Francois and Mel. It's just an FYI, most other people have another person there asking them questions, you know, having a dialogue. And here, what we do is me talking about the wines and obviously answering like the questions that you send us. But it'll be fun if it's just not me, and I'm sure it'll be probably very interesting for you as well. So, any direction, shoot it my way, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And on that note, I'm gonna let you be. Hopefully, enjoy the rest of, I don't know how the weather is wherever you are. Here, there was a huge storm, but now the sun is trying to poke out. So thankfully, it wasn't too bad in the vineyards. And we're gonna escape the downpour because when it's humid and when there's downpours, the disease pressure really goes crazy. But yeah, any questions? And now I feel like a total idiot because I'm like, you send me questions and I haven't answered some of you for like a month, but I will. But I do read them and I will be getting back to all of you. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.